welcome to Fermentality. I'm your host, Kat Pierce with Atlantic Brew Supply, and we're homebrewers talking homebrew and sharing fermentation. All right, welcome to Fermentality. Today we have a special guest for y'all. Martin Keene from Brewlosphy is here. He runs the YouTube channel for Brewlosphy and previously ran the YouTube channel for Homebrew Challenge, where many of Atlantic Brew Supply's recipe kits actually have originated from. Well, thank you, Martin. Thank you so much for joining us and spending your time with me today.
Well, Kat, thanks for having me. It's so cool to be here. I've been to Atlantic Brew Supply, spent so much time here, but we're here today recording this podcast with the doors shut because the store is closed. So I'm getting like this behind the scenes look at the store. So pretty exclusive.
Oh, absolutely. We generally try to record these episodes when there's nobody in the shop just because otherwise it would be like way too loud. I mean, especially with Keith's, music in the background. You never know if we're going to have bluegrass in the background or, hard rock or, whatever. So
there's no grain mill running in the background.
Oh, yeah, exactly. The grain mill specifically is the loudest. So Martin, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience with, putting up YouTube videos and why you decided to get into that.
Yeah, so I've had 3 YouTube brewing channels since I got started with homebrewing. I'm currently with Brewlosphy, so we launched a new YouTube channel called The Brewlosphy Show, which is Brewlosphy's first YouTube channel, first YouTube show. And we publish episodes there doing all of the regular Brewlosphy stuff like experiments, short and shoddy brew days, hop chronicles where we take a look at a hop, and some crazy stuff that we're not normally doing in Brewlosphy as well that kind of lends itself well to video. Prior to that, I was running a YouTube channel called the Homebrew Challenge. The stick there was to brew 99 beers in 99 weeks, which was quite the experience. But it all started with another channel called Homebrew How To. And this was when I was brewing extract just in the kitchen stove. And the idea was that I was just making these beers from recipe kits. And I thought I would put out some videos on how I was doing it and just to see what people would say. And people were generally saying things along the lines of, you're an idiot, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, and so forth, which was entirely correct, entirely accurate. Like, I barely knew what star sound was, let alone any of the basics of brewing at that point. So it had all been good had I not called the channel Homebrew How To, So I soon learned that it was not how to, but you know what? I learned so much
with me,
I learned so much from that. You put your brew days out on the internet and then people will tell you what you did wrong. And I ended up learning so much, and that's what ended up getting me into doing these little bit more professional channels, I guess. But I became a better brewer through doing it. So my reason for getting into YouTube was really just to put out brew days and see what people thought. And it became such a good learning experience that's been sort of the main thing. And even now, we put out videos where there's quite a bit of scientific research that's gone in, or maybe we've worked with a pro brewer, and people put comments on these videos, and we just learn so much from those comments. So I'm in it to learn as much as I'm sort of giving out in education, I would say.
That's really cool. I mean, in a way, it seems like YouTube was kind of like your homebrew club, right?
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Very cool. So what specifically, how did you get started homebrewing just to start out with? And what specifically about the hobby made it stick for you? There are a lot of people that start this hobby and it's a very fleeting hobby and they go, man, this isn't really for me. What was it specifically that made it stick for you, and how did you get started?
Yeah. So I think like a lot of people started with the Mr. Beer kit.
Mm-hmm.
So my wife bought me a Mr. Beer kit for a birthday present or something, and it made truly horrible beer. Truly horrible.
Oh, absolutely.
It was abysmal. It got infected, the first one, and had sort of an appley taste. So that was bad. I tried a couple more times and they were also bad. And at that point, Mr. Beer went into the attic, and that was probably going to be the end of it. But then I had a friend that did homebrew, and he brought over a couple of his beers, and he brewed this sort of peach Belgian triple kind of thing. And Belgian triple is one of my favorite styles. And it's just a style you couldn't buy off the shelf. And I was like, wow, this is actually really good. Tell me how you did it. So I had him come with me for another brew day, and he would talk me through the whole thing. And we made a very serviceable beer at the end of it. And that was it, hooked from then on. So started off doing a lot of the extract kits you just buy off the shelf. Brewer's Best was what, I must have brewed every Brewer's Best at some point. And then eventually I was like, well, now it's maybe time to move to all grain and just be able to make stuff that I couldn't get off the shelf. And that's really how it started and how it stayed. Just the fact that you can play around with so many variables and make all sorts of crazy beers. And it doesn't have to be a commercially viable beer. It can be something that's really just tailored for you. That's what's kept me in it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, there are a lot of people that when they talk about getting into this hobby, what really made it stick for them was the fact that they could make something that they couldn't find on the shelf. And they wanted to explore, okay, for example, like my father, my grandfather, was homebrewing for a while, and he lives in like the Wilmington area. And there was a Wilmington homebrew shop over there, which Wilmington Brewing Company originally had. And he would go and, my dad is really, really obsessed with like rye. And so he's like, man, there are not a lot of like really good rye IPAs out there, or more specifically, rye IPAs with caraway seeds. And he really wanted the beer to emulate rye bread that he had growing up from this particular kosher bakery up in DC. And so he essentially looked at it as, okay, this is why I see people get into homebrewing, because you can actually create something that may not be commercially available.
Or if it is commercially available, it's just not easy to get. So, I mean, I'm originally from Britain, and there's a lot of British beers that I'm not able to get
for sure
over here. And I found a book that listed recipes from some of the most well-known British breweries, especially ones like local to where I used to live. And I was like, wow, I could actually brew a pretty passable attempt at what I was getting commercially, and now I can have it at home. So, yeah.
Awesome. So what was it specifically that made you decide to start the YouTube? I mean, you said that it was really primarily there to, help you like learn a little bit more and see if people were into it. But, like you said, you struggled kind of with the first one. What made you like want to continue doing it? I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into that, especially if it's not your full-time gig.
Yeah, it kind of doubles the brew day because you're setting up your equipment, and then you're setting up your cameras, and then there's all the post-production stuff. But what really got me going into this to publish on a very regular cadence was when I decided to start the Homebrew Challenge. So this was moving away from the previous channel where it was just I'd publish once every 2 or 3 months, to starting to realize that I'd got into a rut where I was brewing the same beer styles over and over again. So I like British bitters, so I'd brew that. Belgian triple, yeah. Guinness clone, yeah, do that. And it would really just be those same beers on a cycle. And then I started to think about all of the different beer styles that were available. And I took a look at the BJCP guidelines. And these have something like 100 and something styles of beer were all listed here. And I looked down that list, and some of them I'd never tried before. I couldn't tell you what they were. I knew nothing about them whatsoever. And that's what really made me think, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to brew them all. I'm going to brew every one that I can find. So I came up with this idea of let's go down the list and get to the bottom of the traditional styles. And there were 99 beer styles. I was like, I'm going to do one of those every month and try it out and put a video out. And then I realized 99 beers once a month, it was going to be way too long to complete that project. Would never finish it. So I was like, right, let's do 99 beers in 99 weeks. That's got a nice ring to it. And that became kind of the slogan of the channel, is 99 beers in 99 weeks. And it seemed like a good idea at first. And after 3 or 4 weeks where I realized that the first 15 styles or so were all lagers. So it was like this huge deal just to brew those.
For sure.
I began to realize that I may have bitten off more than I could chew. But at that point, I'd released the videos. People were starting to watch them, kind of committed at that point. So for 2 years, every week I would brew a beer, and there was no breaks, really. I mean,
That's intense.
Yeah, Christmas.
What did you do with all of the beer? Like, did you drink all of this beer, or did you just give it away?
This was the other thing, right, that I didn't think through. So first of all, I didn't think through the time aspect, right? There's every single week. Like Christmas morning, we opened presents at 10 a.m. Well, I had to get up at 6 a.m. to do the beer that day because, brew day was scheduled then. So I didn't think that bit through, and I didn't think through the what do I do with all the beer question. So I had a system that would brew 10-gallon batches. I used to brew with a friend, and we would split the two, so we'd have 5 gallons each. So I started using that and realized that 10 gallons every week, that's going to be a problem. So I scaled it back to 5, and then I realized that 5 gallons a week, what's that, like 40-something beers, still a problem to get rid of that much beer. So I ended up making the smallest batch that I could with my system, which was 3 gallons or 2.5 gallons. Still too much beer, but I would give it away to anybody who would take it. So I got some friends to install teasers in their house, and I'd give them a keg every month. I would give it to friends, neighbors, anybody, because we're literally just swimming in beer, and I only had so many kegs. So, the beer needed to go. And that was probably the biggest problem of all, was to find homes for all of that beer, and especially some of the beer styles which didn't necessarily work out as I'd liked. They were a problem.
It's like creating like adopt a beer.
Right.
This lonely Flanders red.
Exactly it. Please stop by and take this. And the other thing about doing the BJCP guidelines in order is that they're grouped by category, right?
Right.
So you're basically brewing the same beer over and over again. So you start with a Scottish light, then you get to a Scottish export, and then you get to a wee heavy. It's like they're just the same beer, but the ABV is different.
Right.
So if you got to my beer taps in my basement bar, I have 4 taps, and I would put the 4 beers on, but I might have a Czech Pilsner, a Czech Premium Pilsner, and then 2 other Pilsners as my 4 beers at the time. It wasn't any sort of variety.
Yeah, and then eventually you just get tired of it, and you're like, okay, can we please get to the next category?
So done with lagers. Then I was really excited for the British category, and then I was so done with British beers. And my favorite beer styles are Belgian beers, and those are last in the BJCP guidelines. So I had to wait nearly 2 years till I could get to those.
Holy cow! Yeah, I mean, for me, it's funny. After going through studying for Cicerone, even for BJCP, I just got to a point where I'm like, do I really want this like highly malted or highly hopped like beverage? Nah, I think I'm just going to stick with the lagers. And it's just like going through and having to taste every single thing. I will say though, it did give me an appreciation for Belgians, which historically in the past, like I was not really into. So now I can actually taste a Belgian, and if it's well done, I'm like, all right, I see you. I can drink this. Excellent. What equipment did you start out with?
Yep.
And what do you have now?
So when I started doing all grain, the first piece of equipment I got was a Blickman Brew Easy. So it had I think a 20-gallon kettle on the bottom and then a 15 on top, and then the work would recirculate through it. It was great when I was brewing with my friend and we were splitting the batches. I quickly wanted to do 5-gallon batches in that, and you could, but it was difficult. There was this like floating spar arm that you had to get just so to get it and not put too much liquid in the top kettle versus the bottom and so forth. So I decided to get a smaller system. What I ended up doing was getting a system from Clawhammer Supply, and I was big fans of them because of their YouTube presence, actually.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And so I ended up using their system, and for the majority of the 99 beers that I did and all the Brewlosphy beers that I do now have all been through that system. So that's very nice just to have a single system, single kettle with just a grain basket built into it, and then to have the 240-volt heating element, which means things heat up quick and you can get to mash temperatures real quick and get to boil real quick. So having a system that was pretty flexible but was also going to be quick to use has been my primary requirement, having brewed so frequently.
For sure. I mean, like, and I'm sure that you can kind of see like just the development of your equipment with, your videos starting from the beginning to where it is now.
Yeah,
which would be kind of interesting to see.
That's right, because I started out for fermentation, I was just using plastic carboys at the start, and I was putting them in chest freezers. And when I was going to be brewing all of these beers, I realized pretty quickly I needed more chest freezers. So I went out on Facebook Marketplace and like who's selling a chest freezer?
Yeah.
I had 4 chest freezers in my basement,
Holy cow.
all with plastic carboys in them and temperature controllers for fermentation, because I was doing so many lagers, and these things had to sit there for weeks.
I'm curious to see like what your energy bill is like at the end of the month.
Yeah, that was out of control. And eventually I was able to get rid of all of the chest freezers bar one. And I ended up getting a glycol system. And
Oh, nice.
just pumping glycol through fermenters. And now I'm not using any plastic stuff. I'm using stainless steel fermenters and so forth with the glycol. And that's been really great. It's been really nice to be able to have that control. And it's also freed up so much space.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I feel like any home brewer that like starts to really kind of build up their their brewing and everything, there's definitely always a concern of space. Even with my house, like, I generally only do like 5-gallon batches. But having, just this one like fermentation chamber, that has like a temperature control on it and everything. I have to put that in my living room, like just behind the couch. So that way it's like out of the way, but also like it's a pain. Space is a pain.
Space is a pain. And I've tried to keep ingredients at home as well now. So that takes up a lot of space as well. I mean, my basement is a sight to see. But when we move out of that house, questions will be asked about what on earth went on down there, because I have cameras hanging from the ceiling. There are 8 cameras permanently mounted, hanging in various parts of my basement. Just because I'm brewing, I'm filming by myself, so I needed everything mounted up, and I could just press record on all the angles, and it would just do it because no one's filming me. So yeah, it's quite the space.
Very cool. So you have done multiple experiments with Brewlosphy. Some of them go as far as, using Chat GPT. There we go. I said it correctly. To make recipes and then all the way down to, open fermenting in your bathtub. Thus far, what is your favorite experiment that you've done?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the artificial intelligence stuff, just because it's doing a lot of the things that I was trying to do. So when I was doing 99 beers, I had to come up with a recipe every week,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a lot of work because, as I say, I didn't know many of these styles. So I would look them up, try to figure out what the recipe should be, and then publish the recipe and make it. The recipe would be sold here at Atlantic Brew Supply as well as a recipe kit. And people have made them and have been very complimentary about some of these recipes that I came up with, which is funny when I think about how I came up with them, because it's literally a little bit of Googling here and there. I was listening to your podcast where you were talking about your wedding beers.
Oh, yeah.
And talking about how you would do some pilot batches to see what came out well. I mean, there were no pilot batches done with these things.
For sure.
Let's come up with a recipe. So, and it would just be a case of looking at what other recipes are out there and so forth. Now with things like ChatGPT, they're trained on all that stuff already. So if you prompt it correctly, you can pull that information out and it can come up with a pretty good recipe that meets all of the style guidelines. And the first AI beer I did was quite good, but it was a bit by the numbers. The second one was actually a bit more complex. So that's been fun to mess around with those sort of things. Also, doing the experiments has been really interesting, just from the data collection perspective. So I'm required to collect data on these beers. So whereas before I would just serve the beer to a friend or a family member and have them taste it,
Mm-hmm.
now we go out and we get 20 people to taste the beer, fill in a survey, and then we'll look at the data as to what it says. And
That's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people, yes. And sometimes it'll just be, what hop aromas and flavors are you getting from this single hopped beer? But the experiment ones are through triangle tests. So the way those work is I will brew 2 separate beers and they'll be the same in every way except for one thing. So either it'll be one different ingredient between the two, or it will be a process difference. And then we will present those to 20 people and they're blinded to everything. They're not told anything other than, we're going to pour you 3 cups of beer. 2 of them are the same, one is different, spot the odd one out. And some of the things that we've been testing, it's just so obvious, you would think, that the process step that you changed or the ingredient that you're using would make the beer so different that people will definitely spot it. And it is so much harder than you would imagine to actually pick the odd one out in these beers.
I always just get way too in my head with a triangle test, especially with anything like regarding IPAs. For some reason, if you ask me to do a triangle test with an IPA, I struggle. If it's with a lager, oddly enough, I generally tend to do pretty okay. But I just get in my head, and it's sometimes like, oh, I like the color red, then I like the color blue.
Right.
You know, and so it's difficult for me to, you know, look at that. One of the things actually recently that I learned from the head brewer at Riley Brewing, Anita Riley, was having us do some sensory analysis on a couple of different beers. And we essentially had like 3 beers in front of us, and they were all in clear cups. But the way she discerned it was she did put numbers on there, but it wasn't just 1, 2, 3. Each number was like a 4-digit number. And when you put a 4-digit number and they're all completely different, it all of a sudden takes like the mental, you know, preference away. And I was going, oh my God, you're right. It really did. Like, I didn't even think about that. But that's something that, you know, later on down the line, when I do a triangle test with somebody, I'm gonna be like, just give me numbers. Don't give me colors.
That's so true. So when we serve the triangle test, it's in a red cup, a blue cup, and a green cup.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And when the participants taste it, they get one shot at this, right? So you taste all 3, you pick your favorite, and that's it. When I do it, because I'm not blinded to the variable, because I made the beers, I know what the difference is. I've just got to be able to spot it. I have to do the triangle test 5 times. So somebody out of my line of vision will pour the beers, 2 in the same, 1 in different. Give them to me. I'll pick which one I think is right. They'll tell me if I'm right or wrong. Then dump the beers out, do it again, and probably in a different order. And I'm doing it, and I'm trying to think, this is this one, it's this one, and so forth. And it's not until I went back and watched my last triangle test that I realized that every time I kept picking the red cup, even though in each different situation, whatever was in the red cup had changed each time.
Yeah.
But it looks like I have some kind of unconscious bias for preferring red, or thinking in some way red is different. And I just kept saying red, and it kept being wrong. So yeah, I think the colors might really influence your decision.
Yeah, absolutely. What is one thing that has like significantly surprised you as a result of these experiments?
Yeah, there's been quite a few surprises. One, we sort of already mentioned it, how difficult it would be to tell the difference between 2 beers, even when you know what the difference is and you think it's obvious. It really isn't. That one surprised me. When we look back through all of the Brewlosphy experiments, about 75%, I think, come back as non-significant, so people in general couldn't pick out the difference. But the one that I found quite interesting, quite surprising, was there was one Brewlosphy experiment we did, and it was basically an addition that was added to the beer, and did that addition actually make a flavor difference or not? I did the triangle test, got it wrong, and then the second time I did it, I could just pick up a little bit of a difference on the finish of the beer, and then after that I got it right every single time. So that was a bit surprising to me as well, that you could sort of learn the difference.
Oh, for sure.
And shows the difference that I had over a regular participant who only gets to pick one.
Well, I mean, it's training your palate, right? So once you have at least been able to identify what the difference is, at that point, it's boom, 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 you got it.
Right. But is that really that significant, that if you train yourself, you can tell the difference? Like often.
Oh, absolutely not. It's not incredibly significant if you have to sit there and train yourself in order to identify it.
Right. Why bother with the thing that was different if you really distinguish it? So.
And that the one we're specifically talking about, I believe that was when you were doing the difference between 2017 Cascade hops and 2022 Cascade hops.
That's right.
Yeah. That was interesting. I participated in that, and you know, once again, I feel like, I think it was even in the video, I was like, I just kept going back to the red cup. So, I mean, but it was funny because after I sat down and I took it, and I was with, you know, in a room of other beer professionals, like people who are actually commercially in the industry and have some sensory training, all of us had done something different. And I'm going, what kind of mind games is Martin playing with us right now?
It's crazy. Yeah, that one was a real surprise that it didn't seem to make a difference as to which was which. And one of these bags of hops had been sat in my freezer for 6 years.
But it was at least in your freezer, right?
It was in the freezer, yeah.
So it's funny because Whit Baker was a part of that. And I have judged beers with Whit and have watched him almost gag over isovaleric. I mean, he is super, super sensitive to isovaleric. And I was surprised that he wasn't able to pick up on it.
Well, he was basic. When I revealed to him what the variable was, he was like, oh, yeah, that's not going to make a difference. If the hops are frozen, they're going to be fine. So...
Yeah.
That was a surprise and comforting as well because I have a freezer full of old stuff. So.
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely. If you're going to spend all of that money on it, you might as well really hope that it's actually going to work out.
Exactly.
Awesome. So are you a part of a homebrew club?
No, interestingly, I'd never been to a homebrew meet ever until I started with Brewlosphy this year and needed 20 people to taste my beers, and suddenly, suddenly I had a real interest in homebrew clubs. So I have now actually started to get a bit more involved with it. I've been going probably once a month to a few of them. So White Street Brewers Guild, I got to hang out with them. They've been doing triangle tests for me every month at their meets.
Very nice.
Yeah, that's been really fun, and you get really sort of an expert tasting panel of people if you go to somewhere like that, because these are all people who are doing the same things that I'm doing, right? They're brewing at home and they really know what to look for. So that's been fun to do that.
Very cool. I think you also did I hear that you went to a Garner Ale Society meeting too?
Yeah, they invited me to one of their meetings.
Yeah, dude, those guys are so much fun to hang out with just because they're like a really tight-knit group that like really feed off of each other's knowledge and understanding and learn from one another, and they brew together, and that's really cool to see that, they're also like really into Brewlosphy.
Yeah, right. And I guess I hadn't really thought too much about homebrew clubs and how they work. I kind of figured you'd go, there would be a few beers there and you'd listen to somebody give a talk about something. But actually the highlight is everybody brings a beer
and shares it and wants feedback.
So you get to try all sorts of crazy stuff. I love it. Yeah, I'm totally sold.
So what is one of the biggest mistakes you've ever made in homebrewing, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, Atlantic Brew Supply is a bit involved with this one.
Oh no!
But it was my fault. So as I was going through all these beer styles, I had to brew a smoked beer, a Rauch beer, and I was looking at recipes for this. I don't like smoked anything, so I wasn't expecting to enjoy it very much, but I was like, I'm going to go all in and make the smokiest smoked beer that's possible. So I saw that you could use smoke mold, but the amount that you should use was a bit up in the air. But I did see one recipe that said you could use up to 95% smoked malt.
Oh my God.
So I thought, going to do it, might as well go all in.
Go big or go home, I guess.
So
not always true in beer.
So I came down to ABS and I asked for the cherry wood smoked malt.
I bet it tasted straight up barbecue.
Well, so for my 5-gallon recipe, because it was 90 or 95% smoked malt, I needed like 10 pounds. And I went over to the smoked malt container, and it was like this tiny little 3-pound container on the shelf.
Oh, yeah.
So that's when I first realized that I was probably doing something a little bit outside the norm. So somebody had to go around to the back room and pull out this big sack of the cherry wood smoked malt and just putting it into the bag. I was like, wow, it's really, really smells. Then on brew day, oh my goodness, it just smelled like a bonfire in my basement.
Oh yeah.
Just from opening the bag, it's just this whiff of a bonfire.
Matthew, our producer over here, is just dying.
So I went through with it, made the beer, and then go to serve it on camera. And the first time we tried it and pour it, and it's just this muddy brown. I mean, it just looked foul, just foul.
Looks like chocolate milk.
No, like a worse chocolate milk. It just looks like,
oh no.
It looks like someone took some mud and mixed some water in and gave it a stir. It's terrible. And again, the smell. At this point, I figured that the smell might kind of neutralize a little bit. Not the case whatsoever. Like everything in the house now smell of this cherrywood smoked malt. And the taste, we got through about 3 sips of it each and made our comments like, this is the worst thing we've ever tasted, ever. And the rest of that 5 gallons was promptly put down the sink. Absolutely terrible. And of course, people told me, yeah, what on earth are you thinking? 95% cherrywood smoked malt. Of course it came out that way. And I actually went on to, I think it's a Breeze malt, and I went onto their website later and saw that it recommends no more than 60% in any batch. So it was destined to fail.
You know what? Sometimes things are just destined to fail. So my question about the cherrywood smoked malt and just that whole brew as a whole, did you really get like much ABV out of that? I'm just curious as to what the diastatic power is.
No, it was fine. I mean, I hit all my numbers. So
oh my goodness,
amazingly, yeah.
That alone and in and of itself, for one reason, to me, just like blows my mind. When I started trying to, perfect my dad's rye IPA recipe after my grandfather stopped homebrewing, trying to put that thing together, and my dad be like, it's not rye enough. And so one of these days I'm like, all right, fine. I'll put, like 60% rye in here. And it was definitely rye enough, but dad's like, the ABV isn't where I wanted it. I'm like, what is going on? And of course, no, it doesn't have enough diastatic power, doesn't have enough sugar. And yeah, that was a saddening day to where I had to go to my father and be like, Dad, I'm sorry, but we cannot make just a straight up rye beer. We need some more two-row.
95% rye. Just go all in, What could
95% rye, exactly. You'll get a 1% beer, if that. We'll just be making, hey, maybe that's the new non-alcoholic. Just got to find a yeast that's weak enough to be able to do it. Cool deal. What is a beer that you have made that you are particularly proud of?
Oh, so I've been trying to make Guinness clones for a while and not had a lot of success. The sort of the basics of creating a dry Irish stout is easy enough, and putting it on nitro gives it a huge leg up. So I got a nitro set up at home with the beer gas and the nitro tap, and it got close, but I never really could quite get the sort of the twang you get with a Guinness.
Right.
And I ended up figuring it out, and I was so proud of it, which is to say that I made my regular dry Irish stout recipe, and then I went through this little process of souring it. So I would take a portion of that wort after the brulee was complete, and I just put it in a jug, like a Parish jug, covered it up with food wrap, and left it at room temperature for a couple of days. Then I would add that back, the regular wort, reboil it, kill off any bugs. And my goodness, it came out as like straight up Guinness.
Wow, I would have never thought of something like that.
Yeah, it was insane, and I didn't think it was going to work, or it would really get a real soury off flavor to beer. But it was just enough sort of natural souring just to give it that sort of that little aftertaste you get on a Guinness. That was what I was looking for. So,
have you thought about using some acidulated malt in there?
Yeah, I think I may have even tried that at one point, or just much more lactic acid than was required and stuff like that. But yeah, it was the souring that seemed to do it. And I'm quite sure that's not how real Guinness is made, but it was a pretty good substitute.
Well, there you go. That's pretty cool. Like I said, I would have never thought about something like that. What advice do you have for folks entering the homebrewing hobby?
Bottle bombs are real.
No. Okay.
Take it from me.
That was quick.
So, yeah, I don't bottle anymore. I used to bottle before I got a whole kegging system. And my favorite beer style, I guess, is Belgian Triple. Mm-hmm. So I was making quite a lot of Belgian Triple. I decided that I was going to bottle it, store it for let it age for 6 months or so, and then see how it was after that. So I put the triple in, I put a little bit of priming sugar in, and set up a case of 24 bottles full of that, put it in a cupboard, and forgot about it. Right up until this noise came from this cupboard, and then the smell quickly afterwards of like beer, and the bottles had pretty much in unison shattered and exploded everywhere.
All of them?
Almost all of them, about 2/3 of the bottles had just, and I opened up this cupboard and just shards of glass everywhere. It was a carpeted cupboard. So the carpet stank of beer. There was beer covered over all of the shelves, over everything else in that cupboard. Absolutely. I mean, a year later, I was still finding little shards of glass in little corners.
Oh, no.
And I mean, I thought the beer had fully attenuated. I only added the amount of priming sugar that my brewing software told I had. But, it's warm in there. And I guess fermentation restarted and in a big way. And those bottles, they weren't like super thick Belgian bottles. They were just regular. I think I'd reused some just commercial beer bottles. Yeah, bottle bombs are real.
Holy cow. I mean, knock on wood, and I'm going to do that right now. I have never had a bottle bomb happen, but I've gotten close. There was a mead that I had made with one of my store associates, and we had made this mead, and it was with clover honey because like neither of us had ever used clover honey for anything, and we decided we didn't particularly like the clover honey. So we had drank through, probably about half of this liter bottle, and it was like an easy cap bottle. So It was one of the like recapables. And so we had made that. And we drank about half of it. And I mean, we have this thing where, if it's an especially hard day, we say we need an attitude adjustment. And the attitude adjustment is just a shot of mead. And so we hadn't opened up this bottle in probably about like a month. And I go to open it up and it goes, poof, and there goes just a cloud of CO2 coming out from the bottle. And these little bubbles started forming from the bottom. And I'm going, oh my God, is that carbonated? What happened? Yeah. So if we hadn't opened it up, then we probably would have had a bottle bomb on our hands.
Yeah. And once it happens, you just get really worried every time you're storing, especially high gravity beers. So I don't store anything at room temperature anymore, just in case that's going to be a problem again.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, granted, I keep my house at like 68 during the day and 65 at night. So, I mean, even that's still like on the line. But yeah, no, I can understand why you would keep things refrigerated.
Oh, yes.
So my last question for you today is my favorite question for all of the podcasts and or at least all of the episodes. If you were a beer, what beer would you be and why?
Yeah, so I gave this a bit of thought, and I think I would be a British bitter for a few reasons. I mean, one of my favorite styles, British bitter, delicious. Also, British bitter, I would always be cool. I mean, we're in the North Carolina summer right now, and it would be at cellar temperature, 55 Fahrenheit, very nice. So other reasons to be a bitter. And then the final reason is I'd probably find myself at a lot of English Premier League soccer games because that's where a lot of it is drunk.
Ah, very nice.
Sounds like a good life to me.
Yeah, that sounds pretty awesome. Excellent. All right. Well, Martin, thank you so much for joining us on Fermentality and spending your afternoon with us. I look forward to seeing your next episode on Brewlosphy on YouTube.
Well, you should because you're in it.
Oh, yay!
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Cheers.